This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. We are still in Michigan for this episode of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. We are rolling deep in Michigan this time around, but we're shaking things up a little bit and going in a different direction. For this episode, we're not going to talk about hazy beers, and we're not going to talk about stouts.
Maybe a little hazy.
Maybe a little hazy. Oh, you're right. It actually is kind of hazy.
The original hazies.
There you go. We're going to talk about the original hazies. Joining me for this episode is David Ringler from Cedar Springs Brewhouse and Kusterer Brauhaus.
Kusterer Brauhaus and Cedar Springs Brewing Company, yes.
Cedar Springs Brewing Company, okay. You've won a couple of GABF medals. You focus on Weissbier and German-style Weissbier.
Yes, it is a labor of love.
Yeah, but you go pretty deep on it, and you are all in on this beer and this style.
Yeah, one could kind of say that. I started my brewing career professionally in Bavaria in 1994. And I worked at a little Weissbier brewery and kind of fell in love with the style after avoiding it my first year of living over there because it was hazy.
Yeah,
it looked funny and it tasted
sure.
funny. What is that? But once I fell in love with it, I really went all in.
Fantastic. Well, that's actually a subject that we have not talked very much about ever on the podcast in years of doing this. And so I am intrigued and excited to focus on the subject of Weissbier on this episode. And we're going to go into it. Before we do that, G&D Chillers is the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling. They're proud of the cool partnerships they've built over the past 30 years. G&D has set the standard on quality, service, and reliability with 24/7 service and support. Want to maximize efficiency in your chiller? G&D's micro-channel condensers are designed for less power draw. They have a lighter weight and a more compact design using up to 70% less refrigerant, and that means a lower GWP and lower operating costs. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com or call to discuss your next project. This episode is also sponsored by CanCraft. Need aluminum cans, lids, or PackTech can carriers? Design help? Don't know where to start? Thankfully, CanCraft is nearby and ready to deliver your complete packaging solution. Plus, with low minimums and full service support from design through delivery, reaching your brand potential has never been easier. Visit bsgcraftbrewing.com/cancraft to get started. And of course, before we start, just want to say thanks to Experience Grand Rapids for making this trip possible. To plan your own beer trips to Grand Rapids, start at experiencegr.com. So
and
David,
they are wonderful people.
They are. Yeah. They are.
We've worked with them for a long time, and I know they're involved in the local Beer City Brewers Guild as well. So they've been very supportive of the industry, and I think we've tried to reciprocate. We even recruited a hotel to Cedar Springs just because of our relationship with Experience GR. So
that is incredible. But everybody I've talked to has great things to say about them, and they are also great at supporting. I mean, beer has become a big draw in Grand Rapids, and they realize just how powerful a tourism driver beer can be, and they are, yeah.
No, for sure. They were one of the folks behind the whole Beer City USA thing. That's Charlie Papazian back 8-10 years ago, more than that, I think, actually, when that was going. But they were certainly a big part of organizing that and helping to brand it, and we've taken advantage as much as we can. But
sure.
For real, but it's become a tourist destination because of that. You do see people that are visiting because of this region being known for beer.
Sure. And, we were here years ago. I can't remember the exact year for Homebrew Con.
Yes.
And that was my first Grand Rapids experience. It has always been one of those places where I think, why haven't we been to Michigan more for this? Because
you came for the weather this time of year, right?
I came at the right time of year when, of course, it's about a similar temperature in Colorado where I live right now. So it's kind of like
4 or 5 real active homebrew clubs in this region. In fact, we're sitting in our former homebrew shop that closed in COVID, but we were running competitions out of here, and we're a little bit north of the city, but it's really been cool. When I first moved back from Germany, I immediately met home brewers, and there was one brewery, I think, in Grand Rapids at the time, 1996. but it's really been always, like every place else, the home brewers and the strong community that we have here that are the foundation of what Beer City was built on.
Yes. You're also president of the Michigan Brewers Guild.
Yeah, I was a founding board member of the Beer City Guild, but yeah, then I guess I like to go to meetings, but I've been on the state board now for 6 years, and I missed the annual meeting and got elected president, so that shows me, right? So. So yes, I get to go to a few more meetings this year.
Yeah. He's not here. Let's make him president.
I was actually in Bavaria. So what we've always done is every other year we've rotated. We either take our brewing staff over to Bavaria to actually work in some of the small family-owned Weissbier breweries that are a model for what we do, and rotate them with our kitchen staff as we work on food items as well. So we have a full kitchen at our Cedar Springs location, and we just had two of our kitchen pros that were over there to spend a week working in Schnitzelland and learning how to refine their techniques and make sure that we're putting a little bit of Gemütlichkeit on the platter as well.
That's fantastic. Well, we normally kick off the podcast talking about some history. So why don't you talk to me about yours? Clearly you have some roots there brewing in Germany. Yeah,
I started home brewing like all of us did, and reading The Joy of Home Brewing by Charlie back in 1988, I think it was, with my dad. I was underage at that point, so I didn't taste it, but I did help. And I was then an exchange student, moved over to Germany, and in the course of being there, certainly discovered there was a whole world of beer that was kind of unknown to us here in the U.S., as that was really, at that time, Bell's had even just gotten started here in Michigan. And took a job when I finished school and moved over there, and in the course of that started working in a couple of breweries as a volunteer, and then entered the educational system over there to do a formal apprenticeship, and worked for about a year and a half with Hofbrauhaus Traunstein, which had a chain of brew pubs at that time around Bavaria and one in the north. And so that was an incredibly interesting experience, and then had an opportunity back here in the States to come back and be a brewer with a group that was trying to start a brewery in my hometown of Grand Rapids, and ended up going to Siebel and finishing schooling there. But there were three of us trying to start in 1996, and that was us, Robert Thomas, which is no longer around, and Founders, which had certainly had their trials and difficulties before they finally went boom. So we've all known each other for a long time. New Holland had just gotten started back then, so Jason and Brett, and then Jason, of course, peeled off and eventually became Brewery Vivant. And I think, as we were talking about even before we started, some of the inner relations here of folks that have. But I ended up working for a couple of different breweries. Grand Rapids Brewing Company version 3, which now exists version 4. Worked with Michigan Brewing Company, which no longer exists, and I worked for the original Atwater Block, which was a German brewery over in Detroit back in the late 90s, and that's been through several different ownerships before the Atwater, which is an entirely different company. It got going, and then they've now, I think, are part of Miller Coors, but it was interesting. I then I got married and had to get a real job, and was in a totally different field entirely for a number of years, but kept my foot in this by traveling. I was doing some consulting and I helped a couple of import breweries to get some of their distribution set up here in the U.S., and wrote a blog and just kind of hung around a little bit, and kept my toe in the industry a bit, I guess, when I decided to sell my company in 2013 and jump back in with both feet. The whole idea being that one of these days I'm going to start a little Weissbier brewery, and that's what ended up happening.
So talk to me about starting that up.
It costs twice as much as you think, and it takes twice as long. So.
Yeah. Only twice.
Yeah. But, yeah, like I said, I really had the idea. I just wanted to do a small place at the time, thinking I might, do something part-time. a small place.
You're never going to do that part time.
Which is exactly a famous last words. And to make it worse, we were looking at the historic west side in Grand Rapids, which was the historic German side of that community. But I had family and friends in Cedar Springs, which is a town just a little bit north. We're about 17 miles north of downtown Grand Rapids, and found a wonderful property here right on Main Street that had its own parking. We're on the White Pine Trail, which is a vertical state park that runs for 120 miles on an old Rails to Trails program. And so we have bikers that come by on a regular basis. And it was just a great small town community. There had been nothing built here in 40 years. So it was a town that it was just north of where I lived. And like I said, I had family and friends here anyway, and they kept needling me, come to Cedar Springs. And there's nothing in Well, you're right, there's nothing in Cedar Springs. And so it was a nice opportunity, I think, to really become part of the community. But then, of course, it couldn't be just a little tap room. There's not enough traffic here to do that. And so we ended up doing a full restaurant. And when I had moved back and that I'd been in bars and restaurants through college, et cetera, and had the experience of opening 3 different places prior. Okay, sure. And we ended up building a little bigger place than what I had in what I was originally intending to do. But it's worked out wonderfully in terms of ingratiating ourselves in the community here. And we built, as I said, a full-service restaurant. We have a small winemaking operation, a small distilling operation. So, we can offer a full array of products to our guests. We have our own sodas as well. So we kind of try to, and including Spitzy, which if anybody's been to Germany before may know what Spitzy is. That's a soda. It's kind of an orange cola mix that I've never seen outside of that. It was made originally by Paulaner and Riegele, which are a couple of historical breweries over there. But you see it everywhere over there. Coke and Pepsi both have their own version of it, and I've never seen it outside of that. But you can get it here. So we've actually
because you make your own.
we do. So yeah, that, and then we started in 2013, opened in 2015. And then this past year, we opened a second taproom location on that original destination of the west side of Grand Rapids, which, as I said, was kind of the historical home of 9. There were 9 German breweries right in that little area and a couple of halls prior to Prohibition. And we opened a little tap room that was delayed a bit because of COVID, but we finally got that open here in August of this past year. And that's more of a classic Munich style beer hall. So there's not a full restaurant in there. It's snacky, deli, quick warm type foods, and of course, wonderful Bavarian beer.
I want to talk about Weissbier, and I want to talk about how you then build a beer program where you find the inspiration for it. Obviously, you're a trained brewer. You know what you like, and you know how you want to construct it. But constructing some of these beers with the ingredients that you can get here in the United States may be a little bit different. And you also now are brewing a broad range of those, across the Weissbier, family. I'm going to talk about all those things. Before we do that, AccuBrew is a game-changing fermentation monitoring system that gives you unprecedented insight into your yeast's health and activity. The AccuBrew sensor mounted through your tank's sample port creates a record of sugar conversion, clarity, and temperature for every batch run. Step into the modern era of brewing and get your hands on a system that helps deliver your best brew every batch. Like to improve? So does AccuBrew. Something big is coming. Find out more at accubrew.io. Also at ProBrew, they believe that your brewery deserves equipment as unique as the drinks that you craft. That is why their solutions are specifically designed to help you brew your beer, not someone else's. From brewing to fermenting to carbonating and can filling, ProBrew's customizable equipment empowers breweries to expand operations at their own pace. For more information, visit www.probrew.com or email contact us at probrew.com to learn exactly how they can take your operations to the next level. ProBrew, brew your beer. And is your brewery making its own ciders, seltzers, and other beverages beyond beer, like soda right here at Cedar Springs? If you need a central source for fruit flavor, Old Orchard has you covered. Old Orchard supplies flavored craft juice concentrate blends to beverage brands for the production of beer, cider, seltzer, wine, spirits, kombucha, and more. Flavor your lineup and streamline your sourcing by heading to oldorchard.com/brewer. So, and of course, they're right here.
What's interesting by having some of these other things in our lineup, we really, being German and what we are doing, we are making beer with 4 ingredients. So we have avoided having to do seltzers and some of these things by having cocktails and sodas and this sort of stuff as alternatives. So
sure, cider I saw on your menu
absolutely,
there too.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
But let's talk about Weissbier. So this is something
isn't it wonderful?
It actually is pretty wonderful, and I enjoy drinking it. It's one of those funny things where I never, if I have a whole bunch of beers sitting there to drink, it might not be the first one that I'm going to go for. Every time I have it, I remind myself, a good iteration of Weissbier, I remind myself how much I do enjoy this and wonder why I have it in my head that it's not something that I love.
Well, it's interesting as you're going through this and saying these, and we hear this a lot. I mean, it's funny when we first opened back in 2013, 14, 15 in that process. And I mean, I had a lot of brewer friends and home brewer friends and beer geeks and everything else. And, they would talk about and I'm like, you guys probably aren't going to like our beer. Well, no, what do you mean? I mean, you bet. I said, yeah, but you're probably not going to like our beer. We're not doing the big barrel aged. We're not doing the super huge IPAs. We're just not doing that. We're doing this great grandfather's beer and we did lagers from the very beginning, but really my passion was always the Weissbier. And but one of the things when I was even going through the process with banks and IPAs are if you kind of look at it and you go of crafty beers and you start counting Blue Moon and Hoegaarden, and I mean wheat beers actually are one of the top selling, if not the top selling crafty category.
Sure.
When you break it down. So there is an appeal there, and there's a crossover appeal. And, we had all the licenses up front, but when we opened, it was just beer, and we'd get a lot of people, of course, that come in and insist they don't like beer. And, we can sit down and talk a little bit about flavor instead of getting caught up in the style as much, but, try this and look for these flavors. And I'll bet we had about 2/3 of the people that swore they don't like beer that would drink our original, the classic old school Weissbier, and would be like, oh, actually, I can drink that. And in fact, I use my own wife as an example. I married a woman that didn't like beer, and it took me about 5 years, but I got her started with original Weissbier, and now she's a really good beer drinker. 23 years later, but it was that style. It has characteristics that are unlike what you think of as beer. It doesn't have the big maltiness crunch, and it doesn't have the hoppy bite that offend many people who claim not to like beer. Although I would argue they just haven't met the right one yet. But
Sure. But it also doesn't have, especially in your iteration, some of the more kind of, flowery, cliched, I shouldn't say cliche, but just, some of the more caricature flavors that come from some of that excessive approach to fermentation. You still, in that German tradition, keep it trim.
Well, I think that is one of the beauties of Germanic brewing. I mean, not to certainly speak for everybody, but when you drink German beers, it's really about balance and subtlety. You can sit there and find a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and there's a little nuttiness, there's a little banana, there's a little clove, but you can also just sit there and drink beer with friends and not give it a second thought. I mean, it is a social communal beverage. That's the whole point, without having to hit somebody in the head with a 2x4 and flavor. You can enjoy extreme beers as well, but there's a time and place for all this. This can be an everyday beer, and it can also, when I say this, I mean, we always have at least 3 different versions on tap at any given time, and we've had as many as 6 on it at any given time. But they're meant just to be enjoyed, really. It isn't about totally dissecting it.
Sure. So you decide to start this brewery. Where do you start in building the beer program, knowing that Weissbier is going to be central to that? Because at the same time, there's plenty of examples that run across the gamut of brewing to pull from, and so you needed to form the idea for what your Weissbier family was going to feel like. Right,
and when we there were 2 things. I mean, we started with the equipment. Obviously, we had to make some modifications to what we wanted to do, and we interviewed, I think 33 different brewery manufacturers when we were going through this process. And with all the modifications that we wanted to make, it became difficult. So we ended up designing our own, really, and we worked with a local steel mill, steel roller out of Belding, which is about 18 miles up the road here. that was able to roll the steel for us. And we had a homebrew manufacturer, actually Psychobrew, that had never done anything more than a 1.5 barrel system.
Yeah.
And we talked to them, arm twisted them into helping us put this thing together. So we kind of built our own little thing. Which included
the easy
a little
way to do it.
Yeah,
Sure.
Well, it actually ended up, financially, it was probably better because by the time we had all these mods to, any rack system and everything was infusion mash English style systems. We did it. We invested in a boiler right up front. It's a 15 barrel system, so isn't overly huge, but put in a boiler right away, steam heat, so because we wanted to be able to decoct and step mash, and we do even our English beers, our American style craft beers, we step mash everything, and then we also put in open fermenters right away, to traditional open fermenters, so that primary, that really beautiful flocculent yeast, we just let that to go without any pressure and let that that sing. So we're really trying to get. And again, temp, everything else, trying to tweak and get those flavor, that ester formation right off the bat. I think you taste that when you, the flagship being the original, and that's more the historical version, but you want that subtle estery, those subtle estery notes to balance up the fullness of the body.
Yeah, without the stress notes too. Cool. That open top fermentation is so nice and gentle,
Soft, drinkable. I had to, we just took a Master of Styles class down at Siebel a couple years ago. I guess it was right before COVID, and Randy was, there, and I always debate with him on the high pressure of Hefeweizens, but a lot of this was because these bottle conditioned bottles were coming over and sitting on a dock in Newark for a long time. And these weren't exactly fresh. When you drink a lot of these beers fresh at their source, they are soft. They are not overly carbonated in most cases. So we wanted to replicate that a little bit. And sometimes we have that challenge when we go into competitions because they say the carbonation is too low. But the second part of that,
because American judges are conditioned. I mean, it's the way that it happens. It's the reason why Europeans made like stale tasting IPAs for so long.
Well, and
now that's all.
Frankly, we run into this a lot in competitions, especially with the original, because they don't know what Bernstein Farbendes Weissbier is. They have Hefeweizen, which is the pale version, and that was actually invented in 1965. That's the modern beer, and Dunkelweizen, of course, and Weizenbox and all this. But this one's kind of overlooked. There is a category in the GABF for it, and World Beer Cup, of course, they get more in it. And when we enter Beer Star as well, and they have a very popular category for it, over there. So that is one of the things we struggle with a little bit. A lot of times you have to call competitions and say, hey, this is what we have. Where do I put this in? And they'll be like, oh, well, just put it in the Hef category and we'll see what happens type thing. So, but the second part of your question was then, getting staff on board. So by the time we hired then our first brewer, before we even opened, we traveled over there and spent a couple of weeks working with some of the family brewers that I knew from my time over there and that had become friends. And so we spent a good amount of time in talking with them and getting a feel for how they were treating and what they were looking for with these styles. And some of them are strictly Weissbier brewers, and some of them did like we do, lagers and Weissbier. So that was kind of the first part of the journey, and certainly having a common vision with those guys that this is what we wanted to do, and gals. We've had 3 brewers in our time, 1 female, 2 males. And my original brewmaster when I was overseas was a female, which was very unique in that time. And I had a chance to see her last summer. So we still kind of keep in contact on a lot of this. But, I think that was the other key is someone that was just as passionate about creating this as I was. When I would travel around the U.S. for the 25 years prior to that, I would try wheat beers and Hefeweizens every place I would go. It would just be one of my go-tos. If they had one on, I tried it. And, there was what we were doing ended up being very, very unique. I don't know of anybody, certainly that focuses on this style, but that even brews it on a consistent basis.
But to even get your brewer hooked on it, you had to go over there go through the experience and get them,
well, I think
get
he was
immersed in that.
He was hooked on the class. In fact, I still remember going through the interview process, and I asked for one of it. What was, what might you consider one of your weaknesses as in the industry? And he says, well, I'm not really good at staying up on trends. And I said, I might have a good fit here.
Sure.
And which is kind of funny. I mean, we've made a joke about it here. In fact, we put out you mentioned Hazy's earlier and talking when the Hazy IPA, and I love a lot of them, but it's just not something we've ever done. And we put out a T-shirt that says, had our Weissbier on it, that this was the original Hazy, but he his name's Matt Peterson, and he just has not had interest in doing those, and so we haven't. And like I said, we haven't done seltzers, and we haven't done any of those things. We're trying to, and it is somewhat gratifying, I think, when we go to beer festivals. And we have our booth up there. I mean, we don't get the lines like the people releasing the barrel age, this and that. But what we do get is a lot of the brewers that come by and they want to drink a Pils and they want to drink a Weissbier. And they want to sit around and talk about beer. So there is some satisfaction in that they're not just coming to taste, they're coming there to hang out and have a couple. So.
For sure. I think that's one of the most exciting things about beer is tasting the beer that people that are incredibly passionate about it make. And again, it doesn't really matter what the style is, but
absolutely,
if you are that focused and that disciplined and that excited about making one thing.
My wife would not call me disciplined at all, but
no. Well, you stay on track. Yeah. So again, as you think about it, you decided to, make Weissbier the focus of this. How did you go about creating your first lineup of Weissbiers? You've built the brew system, you've got open top fermenters. How do you start building recipes, but also not just building recipes, but also thinking about what the parameters are that define your beers?
Well, I think, like probably most, when we were getting started, it really wasn't as much of what we wanted to do. And, trying to create everything perfectly up front. It was, we got to make some beer and get it out the door.
Sure.
When we opened, and again, for people not familiar with the area, we're about 20 minutes north of the city by car. So it's an effort for people to get here. But we opened with 4 beers is all we had time to get out by the time we had our license granted. And, the clock's ticking. We had people trained and everything takes longer, of course. And we got to open. So we did. And within 2 weeks, we ran out of all but one beer, which was a high gravity beer. And it's like, all right, we got to close. And we ended up closing for another week, I think, to kind of catch up as we had beer in tank.
Wow.
But, we keep 16 on tap at any given time. And from time to time, we'll have an empty line. But it took probably a year to get all those lines filled. So a little bit of the question is answered, and it took a while to dial it in. And we've had the brewing staff back now 4 times. So of course we tweak and adjust and play every time. We've been through 3 different Weissbier yeasts before we kind of found our fit. And the one that we currently use, I like better in our original. I don't like it as well in the pale, which is what most people would consider a Hefeweizen. But the original is our flagship. That was, kind of the priority. So that was a trade-off, and not trying to carry 2 yeasts.
When you say you like it better, what is the element that you like more about each one?
For me, it was the body and the subtlety of the ester formation. With the other 2, to me, I got a flatter sensation from, not flat in terms of carbon dioxide, but flat in terms of roundness of flavor from the original, from the Bernsteinfarbenes beer, and we actually got a little more fruitiness and a little more a little more of the fruit banana clove ester formation in the pale Weissbier. And not to say that it's not entirely there now, but it's just not as pronounced as it was. And again, when you get into competitions, a lot of times we'll get in that there's not enough clove or there's not enough banana. And again, all that's going to be personality. That's totally okay and totally acceptable.
Yeah.
I mean, if as long as there's not off flavors, that's what we're most concerned about when we get feedback on a lot of this. But we focused here, and honestly, over time, it's funny. Early on, when we first opened, our Pils was our top selling beer. It's the lightest beer, and again, we're kind of in a rural, semi-rural
like
community.
Budweiser.
Yep,
there you go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or
Miller or whatever it is up here in the Midwest may not be Budweiser this far north.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all of the above. Labatt's is actually a big one here in Michigan, believe it or not, with the proximity to Canada, but and Pabst, It's a funny thing has happened over time, and we have a seasonal push, of course, for Oktoberfest. But in both of our locations, the original, the Weissbier is far and away our top-selling beer always, every month after month after month after month. And it has been that way for almost 3 or 4 years. I mean, it always was right up there, and it would be some months number one, and then, maybe Pils or a light ale, or and we have an American lineup of beers too. Maybe the Oktoberfest was in the fall, but it's just been consistent, and it's almost 2 to 1 of anything else in our Grand Rapids location. So, I mean, people identify us with that style, and almost like Blue Moon or Widmer Brothers back in the day. That's what people thought about is a wheat beer, and that's really become our identity in terms of market acceptance, and that people that are coming there, that's what they're looking for.
So it took a few years, took about 3 years, but then it kind of settled in, and people kind of realized that this was the thing that you guys were so focused on, that this was the thing we should order. It's almost like going, do I want to order what I want when I go to a fine restaurant and a chef is cooking for me? Or do I want to order what they're really excited about making?
Yeah, one way or another, it is funny. We talked about Beer City and the Experience GR, and we always know when we get beer tourists in, because a lot of them will come here, okay, it's a brewery, and the first thing they do is to order the IPA. Totally fine, but when I see people do that, I always ask, is it your first time here? And they go, oh, yeah, we've never been here before. We're on a tour. And okay, well, if you're here while you're here, just make sure you give this a try. And this is why, and this is what you're looking for. So, but to me, and of course, like I said, as a young whippersnapper, when I was overseas and working on this and kind of fell in love with this style, and had this idea of any of my friends or anybody that visited, they always seemed to like that beer, and I'm like, well, why don't we have this? And with this idea of creating something and then actually seeing people respond to it is interesting. Now, it's gratifying. I mean, not everybody, of course, likes Weissbier, but we get a lot of people who, I don't like Hefeweizen, but when they actually try this, which is much closer to what you or as good as, if I may be so bold, as anything you'd find in Munich. We find a lot of people that don't think they liked that style actually I do like that style. So, or at least I like this version of it.
Yeah. I want to talk about what do you think some of those kinds of points of excellence are. Some of those like key brewing decisions, and some of those things that you do that lend it this kind of excellence. When I say that, I mean, you have won multiple GABF medals, for these beers. I want to talk about what some of those key points of differentiation are. Before we do that, from the rotatable pickup tube on Rogue Brewing's pilot brew house to the integrated hop backs on Sierra Nevada's twin prototyping brew houses, SS Brewtech has taken technology they invented, working with world-renowned industry veterans, and made them available to every craft brewer. To learn more about SS Brewtech's innovation list, head on over to ssbrewtech.com. Also, 100% recycled, 100% recyclable, and reusable PakTech handles are the sustainable solution to handle your craft beer. PakTech has been a leading producer of secondary packaging for the craft beer industry for over 30 years, and their handles are found across the globe. By fully embracing the principles of circular economy, PakTech helps customers meet their own ambitious, sustainable goals. 100% recycled, 100% recyclable, and reusable, PakTech is the sustainable packaging solution for your craft beer. Order your free samples today. Call 541-461-5000. That's 541-461-5000. And Berkeley Yeast, the creators of Tropic Yeast, which produces massive notes of guava and passion fruit, now bring you Thiol Boost. Berkeley Yeast's Thiol Boost is pure liquid thiol precursors that take tropics to the next level, added to the fermenter when you pitch the yeast and prepare yourself for tropical fruit nirvana. The concentration of precursors is the same in every batch of Thiol Boost, so you can predictably tune the level of tropical flavor by adjusting the dosage. Mention this podcast, get 15% off your next order. Berkeley Yeast, ordinary yeast made extraordinary. So let's talk about that question of excellence. For you, what are some of those kind of key performance indicators? Those,
I got to say, we've screwed it up more than a few times. So I mean,
fair enough.
We have distilled a few batches. Let's just put it that way. That haven't worked out. So,
so that's the key, is making sure you have a backup plan when you screw it up.
Right. Yeah. When we've had, we've certainly had generations of yeast go bad, or have had our issues. I mean, everybody.
And you get your weeded spirits that way, right?
That's right. Yeah. So when we started to figure out, hey, you know what, we can distill this and put it in a barrel, and that didn't suck either. So so we have had a backup plan when necessary. But I mean, a couple of key things early on. We had a little wider loiter ton so that we can make sure we were always, I mean, by tradition and history, Weissbier, Hefeweizen, I mean, Bavarians will almost always call it Weissbier, has to be at least 51% yeast. So, that was an issue for us to make sure that, we were able. Wheat. Yeah, I'm sorry, yeast. Did I say yeast? Yeah.
You did, yeah.
The beauties of semi-live radio, right?
That's all right. It's all right.
Wheat, yeah, exactly. So to make sure that we can get our mash through efficiently. Yeah. And a good a quality screen in our loiter ton in a smaller system, and then, as I said, the other thing is just being able to control temperature, so that we're just trying to. I mean, I know that people will say you don't with the modified malts, you don't necessarily need to do that, but we've tried it both ways, and we, in our opinion, we're just getting more roundness of flavor and more body by just trying to get
with
everything.
The step mash.
Yep, yeah. Trying to get everything. We're trying to get all the full conversion, everything that we can out of the malt. And then obviously healthy, happy yeast makes healthy, happy beer, and that open fermentation up front is another, maybe a little bit of a level of secret. We can do it in a conical too, just by opening up, but right. It's also fun. I mean, some of that's marketing too, that when we take tours through, they can see, yep, here we have the open fermenters. This is exactly the way that great Opa did it. And there's something kind of.
How did you build those open fermenters? Are those, wide and flat geometry?
We were sitting in a bar with the guys in Belding that rolled the steel, and I kind of drew out a napkin what I was looking for. This is what I worked on when I was there. Can we do something like this with kind of a little overflow window to top crop the yeast? And I mean, I wouldn't say we got it exactly right, because it hasn't been certainly as efficient as what we would have liked, but it works. And it's as I said, visually it's kind of cool, and I love the smell of that primary fermentation up front. That's only a couple days, but and then we move it and put it right in the conicals. But it's the way it's always done, and that's what we've tried to emulate here a little bit. And kind of our tagline of being German tradition and crafted in Michigan, we're trying to stick to that by doing it as closely as we can.
But in terms of that geometry, is this like a 1-to-1 geometry, which can be
No, not necessarily. I mean, the biggest thing is getting your for the cropping, getting your volume line right, so you can crop without having everything fall back in. So to talk a little bit about the history and the approach to Weissbier too. I mean, that's also been another thing, and starting in the industry, back in the 90s, in the late 80s, early 90s, craft beer brands at that time, everybody was really small, and you built this by talking about beers one-on-one with customers. And a lot of the tap rooms back then had maybe a light ale and a red ale and a dark ale, and maybe they had a rotating seasonal. And it wasn't 50 or 100 or 25, different beers to choose from back then. But we've almost had to do that again as a German brewery or as a Weissbier brewery, because the standard has always been that everybody has a bunch of IPAs, and then you had Hazy IPAs, and then you have sours, and then you have, there's an expectation by the craft beer world for what you're going to be as a craft brewer. And we're not that. We have two beer menus basically. One is our Kusterer lineup that is all German beers, and that is split between wheat beers and lagers. And then we have an American, a CS line, our Cedar Springs line, that is IPAs and stouts and light ales, and we do a Belgian series in the summer and that kind of thing. And then particularly on Weissbier, because Weissbier most Americans think of as Hefeweizen or whatever they want to call it. But they're referring to that blonde, light fruit forward. And there's a lot of great examples of it around the country, but not that many are really that specific Bavarian Weissbier that we're talking about. Widmer Brothers is a great beer, but it's really not a Bavarian Hefeweizen, it's American wheat. And so we've had to kind of educate a little bit on a one-on-one basis to talk to people about what's a Weissbier or what's a Weissbier when they look at it. This is actually what it is. It is a tradition that dates back 5-6 centuries, coming from northern Bavaria and moving into Munich. And for 300 years, it was exclusively brewed by the royal brewer of the Wittelsbachs, the Bavarian kings, as the one exception to the Reinheitsgebot. And it was up to a third of royal revenues actually during that time. And the style kind of died out in the mid to late 19th century as the rise of lager beers took over. They isolated lager yeast. You had mechanical refrigeration, and lager started to take over that Bavarian and that Munich beer market. But prior to that, Munich was really known for dark, heavy, full beers, very hard water. And the style kind of started to fade away. Ludwig II was the most famous Bavarian king, the one that built all the castles, very disinterested in politics. And he ended up negotiating the public rights to brew wheat beer to George Schneider. Schneider Weiss, many people have still heard of. Mm-hmm. And that's still the oldest Weissbier brewery out there. And we get to see George on a regular basis. I got to see him 3 weeks ago when we were over there. And, their family, if it wasn't for, he's the sixth. His kid is the seventh. Just got done, I think, studying in Chicago. But if it wasn't for that family, the style may have died, and there would have been a need for a Pierre Celis to bring it back at some point. Mm-hmm. But they kept it alive, and there were a couple of people doing it until the 60s, when, as I kind of mentioned earlier, there was a revival on wheat beer styles, and it was with pale malt. You had pale malting techniques, and you started to get these lighter, much more fruitier beers. Americans, certainly a lot of soldiers that were stationed in southern Germany, were exposed to it. They marketed a little bit with a lemon at that point, because the citric acids would cut those phenols. People were used to drinking clear lager beer at that point, from the mid 19th century forward with the rise of Pilsner. And they were really unfamiliar with these hazy beers again, right? And these phenolic flavors that doesn't taste like beer. So the lemon, the citric acid, much like a lime in a Corona, will cut some of that, and it was used as a marketing tool to export to drinking areas outside of Bavaria, and also certainly a lot of soldiers who were stationed there. A lot of tourists were exposed to wheat beer in that fashion. They did not have lemons in Bavaria 500 years ago, so of course that was not the traditional way of serving it. And but many people enjoy it that way now, and that's certainly totally fine. But it was intended to have these phenolic and these fruity flavors. So there was certainly a revival of the style in Bavaria during that time period then, as we got into the late 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. And it was up to a good quarter of the market in Bavaria, again, wheat beer. But at this time, it was primarily that pale Hefeweizen version that we think about over here. I think the last couple of years, it's kind of to fall away a little bit. There's an early to mid 90s craft beer scene developing over there. Berlin's kind of the center, I think, of the German craft beer scene, but it exists all over the country, and certainly in Bavaria as well. So you're starting to see brewers experiment with pale ales and with IPAs. And like I said, these would remind you a lot of the mid maybe the mid 90s versions of what we might have had of some of these things over here. Certainly the extreme flavors don't play as well over there. You'll start to get Bavarians waving their hands and like that's just too much. But you have a nascent scene over there that is starting to evolve. So Weissbier is kind of floating, but it's still, every bar you go into, every brewery you go into, there's going to be a Weissbier available. Mm-hmm. For many people, they're, still that's their number one style. And, so it's one of the things that if you travel in that part of the country, you're going to experience. For us, we keep that pale version on all the time. We call it our Kusterer Modern Weissbier. We do the original, which is our flagship, as I mentioned earlier. That's the Kusterer Original. And then we do a Dunkelweizen on a regular basis. And then we do a couple of Bucks. We do a dark Weizenbock, a pale Weizenbock. And then we've started to do a couple of specific year sensitive where we're trying to do a little research on what the style might have been over a period of time. So 1872 was the year that George Snyder the First got the rights to Weissbier. So we did a version here just last year, our 1872 Urweiss, which was a version modeled after what that might have been at that time. So
how'd you dig up that info?
Just trying to read a lot and talking to George.
Yeah.
It gives us a way to
sounds
kind
like
of
a Ron Pattinson project right there to dig up the historical brew logs.
Yeah. Well, and even here locally, we name our beers Kusterer, who was the first German brewer in this region. He was an 1844 brewer out of the Schwarzwald. His name was Christoph Kusterer, but he eventually, by the time he passed, his family eventually merged with some other German brewers to create the original Grand Rapids Brewing Company in this region prior to Prohibition, which was pretty sizable. They brewed over 300,000-400,000 barrels at their max on the eve of Prohibition, so they were pretty sizable in their day. But Adolf Getz was their primary brewmaster, their original brewmaster, and we were fortunate to get some of his notebooks as well that are all written in German. So we were able to kind of dig through these a little bit and see they didn't necessarily have recipes, but they had a lot of his notes and how he was tweaking and playing with his beers. So those are all things that we can kind of take and experiment with. Of course, these styles have all evolved. The raw materials have evolved. They're not like they were exactly then. And then when we needed a house beer for our new location in Grand Rapids, we pivoted as well. There was a Dampf beer style in the early 19th century in Bavaria. As I mentioned earlier, the wheat beer was exclusively brewed by the royal brewers, so all barley brewers could not use wheat. But wheat beer was the most popular style, so they wanted to kind of emulate it as much as they could. So there was an effort for a while that was called Dampf beer, or would translate as steam beer, but it has nothing to do with the California version. But they would take an all barley beer, and they would pitch the ale yeast, the wheat yeast, and try to get some of that estery formation. So we've kind of played with our own version of that. There's 2 breweries that I know of in Germany that still make this style, but we've tried to do our own little version of that. That's become our house beer then on the west side in Grand Rapids. So we've made this as a kind of a light drinkable ale, but with tendencies of a lager.
Dampf beer. Does it require a specific approach to barley to brew well?
Well, we don't know. There's not really all that many examples. Sure. I mean, again, you're trying to read as much on this as you can. And of the 2 German breweries we're aware of, one is in the north, and so that's not really. It's not really a. I don't think either of them are doing necessarily traditional. The one in Bavaria, I think, is trying to, but it's almost like, again, the American version, nobody really knows what Anchor was brewing in 1896. So you're relying on notes, and you're relying on anecdotal commentary to try to and the term in German actually then morphed, because this was also the era of mechanization, and when they started doing mechanical brewing that was no longer quote unquote by hand, they were using steam powered brewers. Well, that became the term Dampf beer became adopted to mechanical brewers. So any style that was brewed in a brewery with steam power was called a Dampfbier. So the term evolved over time, but we're kind of targeting that early 19th century version with the imitation of wheat beer from a barley brewer.
Sure. When it comes to malt, do you have preferences? Are there specific German malts that you lean on, or
we've switched that as well?
Oh yeah,
yeah. We use Weyermann for a long time, and we've been there several times, but they never sent us our overalls. So
oh.
Yeah. So we've been experimenting a little bit, and we've changed it up a little bit now. So.
Sure. Maybe we talk about Dunkelweizen for a little bit. We're making this darker version of Weissbier. Talk to me about your approach to that.
Well, I mean, I don't want to say it's a secondary. I mean, we kind of half stiff arm it a little bit because we want to make sure it is both visually and on your palate distinct from original. A lot of people look at the original that has a little color to it and think, oh, that's a Dunkelweizen, and it's not. And when you taste them side by side, you can definitely taste a difference. But obviously, we're using chocolate malts in that to both get more of the body and more of a milk chocolatey character. I think to the we almost promote it as a little bit of a nice as a sundae because you got a little banana and chocolate characteristics to it. I mean, no bananas were harmed in the making of this beer, but
careful, your craft beer fans might have a different expectation for that right now.
Sure.
Yeah. But other than that, it's a pretty similar process with just a malt change up on it.
Right. Yeah. It's just different malt bill.
Sure. And then, in terms of process, since you're using an open top fermenter, you are top cropping that yeast and then, cleaning and repitching that, what's that fermentation
Yeah, we probably,
process?
again, in a small brewery, we don't necessarily, we probably don't get as many generations out of it as we could. So we're only really getting 6 to 8 generations out of it, and that's where we've ended up running into problems when we've ever tried to extend it out too far. And that's the one thing about Weissbier. You can pick up dirty draft lines right away. You can taste that diacetyl. Maybe I'm just more sensitive to it, but even that's one of my frustrations. You go out and do accounts, and if you pick that up right away, it's like, when'd you clean your draft lines? Same with the yeast. If the yeast is, if you push it too hard, at least in our small setting, and we have a very basic lab here, so that's one of the disadvantages that we certainly have to probably getting more out of that. But certainly as we grow, that's a big priority for us to invest more in those facilities that we can stretch these a little farther.
Yeah. What's the key to haze stability in this? Because clearly you're making stable haze.
Well, I mean, again, we're all on draft. We don't do any packaging at all.
None.
Right.
Wow.
Right. And so, I mean, unfortunately, it's probably not as is not as stable as we'd really like it, because of course you're going to get, when you draw the last a couple kegs out of a batch, you're going to get some separation. So you're going to get it really murky in the first couple pours, and then the last few pours, and you're going to run a little bit clearer in the middle. But for the most part, we do try to keep it stirred up and in suspension as much as we can. And I mean, a lot of that's certainly in the packaging. When we bring it right to bright tank and transfer it over right away. So, we're not letting it, and we actually don't filter anything. So even our lagers we'll let settle out, before we move over into package.
And the head, of course, with that kind of wheat component is just big and bold and bright and all of those things.
Well, I know the staff always knows when they do get maybe that 28th or 29th keg, and if it's sitting there and gets all murky, they usually call me, because the customers don't like those, but I like the muddy ones. So
if you're offering advice to people trying to homebrewers out there, or somebody trying to brew one of these at home, what would some of your biggest advice be to them?
Well, I mean, we talked a little bit about the mash and about that primary open, but the other thing obviously is your temperature, your primary fermentation temperature for your ester formation. And again, you can tweak that a little bit if you're looking for a little more banana or you're looking for a little more clove or spice on it.
Yeah. So where do you keep it? Where do you lean on that?
Well,
Somewhere
as
in the
I'm
middle.
a German, yeah, it's balanced. I like to have a little hint of both, and I don't really necessarily. Like I said, that hurts us sometimes in judging if it's not clovey enough or it's not banana-y enough. But one of the things that I like, especially on the original, the pale one, to me, I mean, it's nice in the summer, which is what people think about in it. But it can, to me personally, can get a little sweet if you drink a lot of those, or more than two. Whereas the original, I can make a session out of those if I have to. So, and these are all very drinkable beers. There's session beers for between 4.8 and 5.3, so they're not they're not super strong.
Sure.
You can have a couple. They pair great with food. One of the nice things we have when we do beer tastings with people is it is much easier to pair up when you're not overwhelming with a hop bite or a great big bodied high alcohol beer. You can actually pair with fish and salads and things like that when you're working with other restaurants to create a tasting menu. So subtlety and balance.
And it's a very affordable beer too, where you're selling this nice large traditional glass, for a very reasonable price that people can come in and have a couple. Also,
well, we did make a commitment, as you see here, to the German glassware. So we work with Sam here they have an office in Toledo, and they all have their fill lines on them, the 1/2 liter fill lines. So it leaves proper headspace that you're getting some of those aromas, which is really a big part of that sensory experience as you're first tasting this beer and getting some of those estery notes that's coming from the aroma. And obviously, it's also visually appealing. It's attractive with the logos and everything on them. Of course, in Michigan, we have this whole thing we're one of the few states where you can't do branded glassware except in various particular circumstances. We can do them here, but in the market, if you go to bars and restaurants here, very, very, very few logoed glassware. If they do buy it, they have to do it through a third party. They can't get it from a distributor or from a supplier itself. So you don't see a lot of logo glassware. I'm so glad we can
protect consumers by making a bar not be able to buy glassware.
Well, it's as you very well know, part of it is to protect you from, Anheuser-Busch supplying all the glassware and getting all the tap handles. But it seems like they're doing that anyway. So Michigan's a little bit funky in terms of seeing logoed glassware, but certainly on our own premise, it's we don't use the shaker pint. We use proper glassware for each style, and it's part of our shtick, if you will, that people can experience these styles as the brewer intended.
That's an attractive service and makes the beer look better, that much better too. And people drink first with their eyes. Let's pull out for a second. Let's talk about the big picture. What do you hope to achieve? What's the end goal for Cedar Springs and Kusterer Brauhaus?
Well, to me, I mean, I'm approaching my mid-50s here now, so I fell in love with this style, and then that's really been kind of my whole goal is to introduce this to my hometown and perhaps my region, and if people think of Weissbier in our neck of the woods, I'd like them to think of us. That's really the overarching goal. Certainly we just opened another location, and we have some growth ambition. That the world has obviously changed here in the last 3 years.
Right.
And I think a lot of the financial fundamentals are always the same, but there are maybe a certain or a different appeal or look of the craft beer world now from both M&A and from the banking perspective too. So there's a whole new set of challenges to deal with when you're looking at growth. But we're not I don't think I'm done yet. I got another 20 years to go, so we'll see what we can do in the meantime.
There's plenty more Weissbier to be made, for sure. Well, I think that's a great place to bring it to a close. G&D Chillers is the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling. CanCraft is nearby and ready to deliver your complete packaging solution. AccuBrew gives brewers like you unprecedented insight into your fermentation process. ProBrew solutions are specifically designed to help you brew your beer. If you need a central source for fruit flavor, Old Orchard has you covered. SS Brewtech is taking tech they invented working with industry vets and made them available to every craft brewer. PackTech handles are the sustainable solution to handle your craft beer, and Berkeley Yeast Thiol Boost is pure liquid thiol precursors that take tropics to the next level. If you've enjoyed this conversation or any others, please go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button. Let us know that you value what we do, and of course you'll gain access to all sorts of great subscriber-only content on the website. Dave, if people want to learn more about the beer that you all make here at Cedar Springs and Kusterer Brauhaus, where do they find more about you?
Oh, well, obviously we're on the interwebbies like everybody else. We're in the process actually of redoing our website, so I apologize if it's not totally up to date, but we're at csbrew.com or at grbrauhaus.com for our websites, and we're quite active on the social medias as well, so you can find us on Facebook, etc.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for talking to me about Weissbier. It's been fun.
Oh, thanks for coming by and drinking some bread with us.
Yeah, cheers.
Prost.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.